So, a little bit of agenda bash. You can now please start sending around the blue sheets now that we've hopefully got the majority of the people here in the room. Thank you very much to our volunteer note takers. We've got Ule taking notes and Wes taking Jabber relay duties for us. Wes can come claim his sticker later. The agenda bash, we've got one presentation held over from last meeting that we weren't able to get to on CRID. Daniel's then going to talk about the updates to the naming architecture, and particularly we're going to look at this issue around the renumbering and how that fits the naming architecture. Marcus on zero config hybrid proxy, the next NCP, and then the main event. Do we have any agenda bashes on that? Good, thank you. Just to make a change, I put for reference, primarily, a list of the documents that have been updated or newly brought to the group since our last meeting. Only a few of these are actually going to be presented on today, but so this is mostly here just for reference, so that you don't all have to scrabble through the working group page to figure out what has changed this time around. Just an administrative note also for the speakers. For Meet Echo purposes, please do stand in the little rectangle by the microphone down there. It helps out the Meet Echo folks a lot if you're not moving around too much during a presentation. Unfortunately, that does mean you've got your back to the slides. I'm afraid there's just nothing I can do about that. I have suggested to the Secretariat that maybe for future use of this room that we get an extra monitor up front. But for now, that's what we've got. So, Michael, I think you're up next. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Michael Cloverdan from Cable Labs.
Can you get closer, please, Michael?
Excuse me?
Yeah, no, I don't think the mic's picking you up.
Good morning. I'm Michael Cloverdan from Cable Labs. Better? All right. I'm presenting CERID option. Next slide. The purpose of this draft, why are we doing this? Everybody knows that there is a need to determine the edge router. There are various mechanisms to do this. One of the needs for this draft are RFC 7084 compliant routers. This is a complementary protocol. This is not meant to replace, this is meant to enhance, to be used as an option. Next slide. So here's an example of a 7084 router. The edge router determines it's an edge router, or like HNCP, you can declare it explicitly, it is the edge. If it is the edge, all the others by default are internal routers. In this example, the IRs provide all the IP addresses, but the CER provides the prefix delegations to each of those routers. Next slide. I'm going through these quickly because you've probably seen these before. So I want to save most of the time for questions. So how do we propose this? The CERID is done via a DHCP v6 option. This option, if you want an edge router that naturally wants to be declared there to not be the edge router, you can explicitly say you are not the edge router by putting in a double colon instead of an IP address. The CER option is meant to house an IP address. Could be something as simple as a flag, but meant for an IP address. Why? For communication, so that each of the IRs know exactly who is the edge router for communication. That a DHCP option is passed along to all the subsequent internal routers, so everybody knows who is the edge. Next slide. The option is simple. Basically, we've got our option code, length, and the CERD itself. Again, up to 128 bits. Next slide. Applicability. Anything that needs to know what is the edge using a really lightweight method. You could extend this to include other information if you like. Bottom bullet. There's precedent. There are existing clients for the CER option. The purpose of me being here is to offer this as an alternative to the rest of the community. Next slide. History. This started before I started with the IETF. I'm just finishing it. Tried to present it at Toronto, but there were more important discussions taking place then. Security features were added. This group said, no, there's no need for that. They were removed. That still remains an option if needed. Next slide. And most important slide, the summary. This is meant to be a complement protocol, not to replace, but to be alongside and enhance or use utterly if you choose to do that. An additional tool in the toolbox. No harm, no foul. It doesn't interfere with other existing protocols. It's easy to set manually if you choose to do that. It's lightweight, it's optional, and it provides a communication from the get-go between all the IRs and the CER. Next slide. So what we want to decide here today, is this of enough interest that you'd like to see this go forward? Would you like this option to be available to have this as a tool in your toolbox? Should this become a working group document?
Thank you, Mike.
That's it.
And please, all speakers do state your name and affiliations.
Eric Klein, Google. I said this before, the first time it came up, and I'll keep saying this, I think this is useless. This is the equivalent of the I'm not evil bit, or the evil bit, or whatever it is. There's no way in hell this can be trusted. I understand people are going to do it anyway, right? And you're sort of, it's already past DHC and Cable Labs is going to do it anyway, sure. But I still think this is useless. If I could turn this off in any box that I bought, I would. If I couldn't turn it off, I wouldn't buy that box. This is ridiculous from a security standpoint, I think.
John Brzezowski. We don't necessarily disagree, right? But the reason why we're here is we're being asked for it, right? So we're trying to, I think, talking to Michael and Mark and Ray before the meeting, we're trying to establish, hey, if people are asking us for it, or something that does it, what should we do? Ignore it? I mean, we at this stage of the game, it may become a vendor option at this stage of the game. So I think this will be the last time you hear about CERID here at HomeNet. Respectfully, just out of respect for people's time, but I want to make it very clear to folks that we are being asked for stuff for this sort of functionality, right? So
John,
let's talk about that and how we resolve that.
John, this is Ted Lemon. Could you clarify who us is?
I'm Comcast.
So
I
your customers are asking you for this?
No, other manufacturers of retail CPE routers are asking us for something like this.
They're making boxes for you. Why are they asking you
No,
for
they're not.
things?
No, D-Link, Apple, Netgear, they don't all make boxes for me. They make boxes for you, so that you can go to Best Buy or wherever.
So they want Comcast to send the CERID.
Correct.
But
they want something that like it, that looks and smells like it, right?
Okay. So in the context,
So what do you want to do?
okay, so in the context of HomeNet, where since this option was first introduced, we've now got HNCP.
Yeah.
In a pure HomeNet environment, is there any applicability to this option?
In HomeNet, there are other means to do it.
Indeed.
This is an alternative means as a lightweight protocol with or without HomeNet.
Okay, but this applies in the 7084 case, not in the HNCP HomeNet style case.
It applies specifically in the 70084 case, but can apply elsewhere as well.
Okay. Okay, let's hear from the rest of the line, but I'd say respectfully from where we stand as a group now, I think this is probably a six-man type issue, or V6 Ops, rather than a, sorry, I'm not sure exactly what the split is between those two, rather than a HomeNet, because if we needed as a transitional mechanism, I can see it having a role here. But now that we have HNCP, I'm inclined not to think that we need it.
I agree with you that we're trying to work on a superior solution to the same thing, which is being able to figure out how to organize your routers inside your house and whatnot. I mean, I think that's probably what people are asking for. They're not necessarily asking for CERID, right? I mean, I'd like to get a clarity on what they're asking for because they're not asking me, but I suspect they're looking for a way for your house to actually work as a leaf network off of the CPE equipment rather than looking specifically for this option, but John's going to come up and tell me.
John Brzezowski, Marcus, right. They're not asking specifically for the CERID option. They're asking for the thing that they're not asking specifically for CERID itself by name, but they're asking for something that does something like what it does,
okay.
Right? So you're correct, right?
Okay, thank you.
And then the other comments I have is I'd be pretty strongly against any mechanism that has no notion that there might be more than one edge router. And I think that's a fatal flaw in the current proposal, because I think that there can be more than one edge router, and we want to support that better and better going forward. We don't want to make things that eliminate that.
Okay, thank you.
Terry Lynn, Verizon. I guess just to add on to what Margaret talked about, I'd be concerned with multiples of these advertising they're the edge when they're not the edge. Anyone who's had, a rogue DHCP server, in their environment and trying to find it has run into, real issues. So I'm just reminded of one of my favorite quotes: "When in doubt, do the right thing."
Okay, and we're going to cut the line off to Peter on this.
Barbara Stark, AT&T. I'm sorry, Michael. You know how I feel about this thing. So this was the first I've heard that D-Link was asking Comcast for this sort of thing, because I haven't had any requests from any of the router vendors myself. So I'm actually going to have to go to my internal guys and ask them if they've had any requests, because nobody's come to me with any such requests. And the comment that I've made previously related to this is kind of similar to what Eric was saying, only without as much passion, that I don't think you can trust this to provide you with any information that is actionable. In other words, you need to not trust your uplinks until you have some reason to trust them. And one of the examples that I brought out around AT&T is that one of the routers we ship, we actually intend for the user to put their own router behind that one, and for their own router to be their edge router and not the router that we ship. But if we were to send some signal from the network, it would only make it as far as our router, and then our router would have to then send another I'm an edge. Anyway, it gets really weird. So I cannot support this.
I'm Peter Lofberg. So aren't we supposed to build a bigger internet? So I think people already said what I'm trying to say, but you may have multiple border gateways, and then it becomes even more complicated. You may have multiple border gateways that have different policies, and they may have different capabilities behind the border gateway on the outside. And then there may be different devices in the home that have different policies that needs to talk to the right border gateway, and this thing just dictates, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, I think on that basis we should take a very quick hum. Ted will tell me if I do this wrong, hopefully. So hum first, please, for anybody who believes that there is applicability to this in the specific in the specific context of HomeNet where we are now with HNCP on the table.
Clarifying question before we decide to hum. Is it okay for us to say, no, we don't want to do this and we have no idea how to do it? Or do we, are you going to ask if we want to look for an alternative as well?
My understanding is, when looking at HNCP guys here, is that this already provides, the HNCP actually provides this functionality.
Okay,
They're
so
saying
the
yes.
question is, do we believe that there's that we want to do something else except? Sorry.
Okay.
Do we want to do we want to standardize an alternative mechanism as well as the HNCP recommendations? That's the question.
No, that's not the question. I don't think that's I think given HNCP provides this functionality and that's already working group adopted, then there's no utility in pursuing alternate options other than for a 7084 transitional case, which I believe is now out of our scope.
Okay.
Barbara.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure that one of the drafts in HomeNet already has kind of a sequence of decision points for deciding kind of a default whether or not you're an edge, and if the user, the owner of this box, wants something else, they need to have the ability to configure it to behave different.
Okay, that's just one last word, please, Margaret, because we do need to get this done.
I want to say that maybe you'll ask this as a separate question, but rather than just diverting work around to other working groups, I mean, maybe we could ask the question whether people think this needs to be done in the IETF at all, not just whether it's applicable to HomeNet.
Okay, that's a fair question.
But you could ask two sets of questions. That's fine with me.
That is a very fair question. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so going back to the original question that I asked, I think that still stands as a valid hum. Is there deemed to be applicability for this in the context of HomeNet with HNCP? Hum now. And I hear crickets. I think Margaret's question is now a perfectly good next question. Do we believe that this is a question that is potentially useful in other IETF groups that should be solved? I still hear crickets. Okay. Which I think makes any other further hums probably moot at this point, unless Ted has other views.
Just with my very worn-out AD hat on, we don't actually have the ability to set IETF consensus. So the fact that we don't think that the IETF should do this doesn't mean that the IETF shouldn't do this, although the people here in the room also go to the working groups that probably would do this. So, that's not a very hopeful sign.
I just think it's, the point of thinking something's a bad idea, so you encourage someone to go to another group could potentially waste their time. That was all I was.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, so next up we have Daniel Migo on our front-end naming delegation.
Hi. So this is the first draft. We're actually in the 5th version.
Could you make sure to stand in the box?
Oh, in the box.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way the hook can reach you.
Okay. Don't throw anything to me. So this is actually the 6th version. We received pretty much comments, and I think we were always in line with the comments. So any comments has been treated and reported to the mailing list. So the last comments we had were clarification on how the resolution is performed between the authoritative part and the resolution part. So just to clarify, we mostly deal with the authoritative part. And then was how to handle local scope and global scope names. So the current thinking was global scope names should be in the DNS, and local scope names and IP address should not be hosted in the DNS, but should be resolved using local resolution mechanisms like MDNS or those that are being studied in DNSNB. We had also privacy consideration. So, and we clarify also the text with the pro and cons about outsourcing the signing of the zone. Well, to be very clear, the recommendation is that the CPU signs the zone. So, but it seems that it was not very clear. So we tried to clarify that. We also document a little bit more how the reverse zone can be handled by the CPU, and add some reference that were missing in the previous version. So that was the last version until we received some comments about the renumbering issues. So that's what I'm going to present now, how we intend to deal with that, and to get your feedbacks now so that we can go to the next version, and I hope that we're going to be ready for last call or something like that. Next slide. So that's the next slide. So remember, basically it's a slave and a hidden master. So when renumbering occurs, one of the, we don't consider that both IP addresses are changing. We consider that either one or the other are being renumbered. So, so how the synchronization is performed, you send the hidden master sends a notify, the slave sends a SOI request, and then updates the zone depending on the serial number. Next slide. So the basic idea is when our IP is changing, it has to inform the other part that its IP has been changed. There are two cases. So we consider renumbering on the host hidden master, renumbering on the slave, and we consider the make before break and the break before make. Was a scenario in the renumbering. How the IP address can be provided to the other peer can be done via other protocol than the DNS, but we mostly focus our attention in the DNS. And we also limit the case where you have only one interface between the slave and the hidden master. Well, we clarified that these are the limits, and if these limits are not respected, what should be adjusted. But it's just to clarify then the following explanation. We also assume that the channel is being secured with 6.0 or TSA. Next slide. So for the make before break, well, what the hidden master has to do, basically it has to update the zone. So I recommend that he's changing all the binding with the new IP addresses, even though the two IP addresses are being routed. I think I'd like to remove that there is a binding between the new and the old in the zone. So I think we should remove this step. So just keep, when you have the new IP address, when you're sure each host got its new IP address, just put it into the zone, sign the zone, and then synchronize with the HOMENET, synchronize the HOMENET zone with the slave, and update your channel. So, well, the thing is that the synchronization of the slave and the master and the update can be combined, but that together. So, but that's two different things. So next slide. So the details are, well, the hidden master has changed the IP address. He sent a notify. The slave received this notify. He can authenticate this notify since he got information within the notify payload, DNS payload, and he can authenticate it with the keys. Then it checks if the IP address has changed. If the IP address has changed, then you perform a reachability check, and if everything goes fine, then you update the zone. That's how. So to inform that the IP address has changed, I consider, well, two ways. One which is looking at the IP header, and the other, we can use the DNS and use the EDNS subnet, EDNS client subnet option. And then for the reachability check, you should first start with the IP address you have in the header, and if it doesn't work, then you might try the EDNS option. So that's, if there are any comments about, but that's what I'm gonna write in the next version.
Yes, sorry, Ray Bellis with Back My Hat On. So we need to consider the implications for the slave server software functionality. I mean, it sounds like you're describing a feature that simply doesn't exist in existing name servers to take the IP address information that's coming in from the notify and then automatically reconfigure essentially what on bind would be the named.conf to say, well, now go and transfer this zone from this particular address instead of from the one that's configured.
Yeah. So that's, yeah, if we're not using the options, well, I mean, you will have, yeah, I mean, the fact that there is an update is something that is new by itself.
I'd also strongly recommend against reusing or abusing the EDNS client subnet option for this feature. I think if there's to be an EDNS option, it should be a separate new option in its own right, rather than overloading that functionality.
Okay,
but, we don't have. Okay.
Mark Andrews, Isley. Doing something like this has been on my to-do list for named for the last decade. Okay? Yeah, and choose a new, just get a new clients, new EDNS option. Don't reuse EDNS clients. They've got trade-offs. Using the header IP address, the packet header works well with NATs and things like that. So if you've got to go out through a NAT, and
yeah, that's that.
It's got the advantages there.
But I mean, if you use the IP header, then, well, even though, well, you're resilient to NAT, so I think it might be the best option.
it's whether the name server itself ends up sitting behind the NAT, or behind a NAT in V4. I know we're talking V6 here, but this will be used in dual stack and everything else, so we've got to make it all work. Whereas putting an EDNS option, the name server has to work out what its external address is. So it's the usual NAT, or whether it's NAT66 or NAT44. Yeah.
So just to make it clear, I understand that the EDNS client subnet is not a good idea, so I will remove that. Then what I'm not clear is, should I specify that we should left that for new options? And the second question is, should we mention that we consider the IP header or not?
Whether do the IP header or do the subnet option, I think that's a configuration option. I default to the IP header, but allow the other. The option, the EDNS option, I'd have it support multiple addresses and things like that. As a list of addresses linked, tagged.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Jim Gaddis, Google. I just want to note I had a conversation with Paul Dixie a few months ago on basically this kind of topic, and adding the signature to notifies was the way he was, clearly wanted to see things happen.
So using the notify, so with an option or?
No, using tsig on notify.
Okay, tsig, okay.
David Lamputter, apologies for the stupid question. Where is the key material coming from? David Lamputter.
I mean, you mean the...
For the tsig. How do we get the keys?
Well, they have been configured for, during the settings. So the key, you're wondering how the key has been configured. Yeah. So that's been done, while the settings between the master and the hidden slave. So there are different ways. DHCP options is one way. You can also figure out that you have provided your public key through a GUI interface.
This is probably never going to be a true zero config option, unfortunately.
Comment from the Jabber room, Julius. Does this version address the case where there are multiple CPEs on the home net?
I don't see the problem with multiple CPEs, but if there is one, I would be happy to.
Was that Julius who asked that question?
Okay.
Okay. Well, if Julius is listening, or if maybe relay this back to him, if you could please put that question specifically to the list, and we'll make sure it's addressed. Thank you.
Mark Andrews. DNS doesn't really support multiple masters, so you go one of the CPEs. If the CPE is being the DNS master will have to be chosen. It's as simple as that.
Markus Stenberg. I don't think this will be zero configuration in any case, because I think the HOMENET default for naming will be what I'm presenting next, and that will actually not involve DNS update, and it will not involve a DNS zone. So actually a decision to publish your device names externally will essentially require you to be wanting to do DNS update to one of your local DNS servers, which sounds like already a nerd option and for the 1% crowd. And if you do that, then you might as well also specify the remote IP address and the key material for this stuff. So I'm not sure how applicable it is actually for HOMENET in general, but I'm sure somebody will come up with some zero configuration way of doing all of this, but I don't see it currently.
Okay, Daniel?
Okay, so, to the break before make, that's exactly the same processing, except that while the bindings are just cached, you will not be able to reach the end host. So some host might be enrichable 2 times the TTL. So for the when the slave is being renumbered, well, the main difference is that you don't have to reassign the zone. The zone is not impact, it's only the synchronization channel. So the slave informs the host master. The host master performs the reachability checks and then updates its configuration. That's the step. So next slide, how to inform the host master? Well, one way could be that the slave sends a protected SOA request. The hidden master can authenticate that and then perform a routability check. So how to perform the routability check? There are basically two options: using a SOA request or a notify. The advantage of the notify is that because you have this synchronization mechanism, the master has been already configured to send notify, but sending a SOA is something new. I mean, it has not been, the master is never supposed to send SOA request to the slave. So, but the problem, this maybe not a problem, but the thing is that by sending a notify, then you're kind of asking the slave to send back a SOA request. So, and eventually to perform some synchronization. So that's the two things to balance. On the other hand, if making sure that once you're being renumbered, you synchronize is maybe also safe in case a notify payload has been sent by the master while the slave has been renumbered. So there are two things to be balanced, but I would probably favor for a notify. And I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Mark Andrews, IC again. Slave renumbering is a non-issue. Truly, it is a non-issue. Name servers today look up the addresses go and take the names of name servers, look up their addresses, and send the notifies to them. This is standard DNS.
Okay, right.
They just do this. Slaves renumber all the time. There's nothing special here. Okay. There's no new protocol needed. It's been running in name servers for over a decade.
So
Mark,
to clarify, you say essentially just the configuration should be the host name of the slave rather than an IP address.
Host name of the slave, yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah. To make things simpler.
Because you pull it out of name server lists. Today, a name server, when it's sending a notify, looks at the NSRS set by default. Big extensions, but by default looks at the NSRS set, looks up the IP addresses using ordinary DNS lookups, and then sends notifiers to those addresses.
Okay, right. So, perfect. So, this is solved. Next slide. Yeah, this is solved too. So, I will submit next version. Peter?
Peter Kortinik. This was a comment or this was meant as a response to Mark's comment. I know that almost all of the name servers we run would use IP addresses instead of just the names. So if that's of course we are not running authoritatives behind a DSL line or something, but if the assumption is that this has to work on names, that needs to be very strictly spelled out in the document. It's an option, but it's not necessarily standard practice, and there are other reasons to operate on the IP address rather than the name. So sure. there might be a conflict here.
Do you believe it would suffice that if the document said if you use a name, it will just keep on working, but if you use a number, you have to be prepared to change that number on occasion? or an address, I should say, rather than a number.
That is actually the lawyer's approach to the solution, because what you say is strictly true, but I'm not really sure the target audience is going to understand that. It might just need more work, but maybe I'm hand waving here.
Okay. I think that the point I was trying to make is that if you're aware that your slave is going to be renumbered, then simply manually renumbering it may be simpler than trying to introduce protocol-based mechanisms for handling this automatically.
The other reason might be that the address that is going to initiate the transfer that you need anyway might be different from the address you're sending the notify to. So that there might be manual or whatever intervention necessary anyway.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, quick update on the DHCP options relating to this.
So next slide. So the new things, we have restructured a little bit the draft, but it's only for clarifications. We add one port parameters to one of the DHCP options. The reason was that the signaling, the transfer of the reason we specify a port was to enable the hidden master to provide the zone to not the pole 53 only, but can also derive other ports. And we also add the multiple ISP scenario, so just to show it works, and that's all. So this is pretty much a final version, unless someone... I'm going to reread that, so probably fix some notes.
In the light of the discussion we were just having, that the DHCP options should be reviewed to ensure that they support both a name or an IP address for the slave.
It's a name. It's a name. So I think I'm done.
Okay. Any further questions? No. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Marcus.
And by the way, thank you for all the comments that have been provided.
Yeah. Marcus is getting ready. Hopefully, Daniel and co will get a new version of that ready sometime soon. And my view is that should be pretty then close to ready for last call. So look out for that, please, within the next few weeks.
Hello, I'm Markus Stenberg, and just to comment on my comment before, I actually found the previous presentation's material interesting, but I'm just looking forward to hearing about how it can be zero configured. So I find the work itself valuable, and I got a comment about were you trying to market your solution, and the answer is no, I'm not actually, because this is something a bit more different. This is the zero configuration approach for low-cost DNS handling of getting all devices visible within the home, and what Miguel presented is actually how you can get potentially subset of them visible outside your home as well. So anyway, without further ado, this actually finally got adopted as a working group document. Next slide, please. The basic problem, there is the grand total of 2 slides describing the problem, because now that it's a working group document, I think it's a good idea to give the summary again, and I gave one in the NSSD yesterday, and this is the short version. There is actually politically enough IPv4 addresses there, but the basic problem is still that the client needs the DHCP server to provide it with a DNS server and a search path to be used. And then given the DNS server has appropriate DNS SD material within the zone there, it can redirect the first hop DNS servers or whoever is doing the resolving requests towards the hybrid proxy that is living on the correct link. And all of that needs to be configured in some way, and in the case of HomeNet, it has to be actually configured without any user intervention by default. Next slide, please. So the answer for the last 2 years has been to use some sort of distributed database, whether it's OSPF or HNCP or something else, and stick in three TLVs, only one of them which is actually mandatory to configure the specific DNS zone related information that's visible over there, and additionally configure hybrid proxies using that same information, and finally to provide using the DHCP the appropriate search domain to the client so they can actually bootstrap their lookups using the right search path. Next slide, please. This history slide is just mostly to illustrate that this is actually a relatively developed solution. In 2003, I presented the first version that was using OSPF and was already running code and already actually usable. And it had already the 3 TLVs that we have still today. There is a couple of bit level changes, but nothing really major. After that, it was generalized not to be OSPF specific, and after that, it mentioned HNCP at some version, and after that, there was some minor twiddling based on review comments. But basically, what you have now is more or less the thing that we had 2 years ago soon. So it's relatively mature, I think. Next slide, please. There is also 2 implementations. The first one was based on OSPF auto-configuration LSAs, and it's intentionally not a publicly provided URL, but it's still available there if you really want to find it. And the current version that actually implements the what's in the draft is given in the URL there at homewrt.org and GitHub and wherever. So it's sort of fully implemented and has been for a long time. Next slide, please. Any questions about the solution? I can go to detail, but I have presented it like 5 times in IETF before, so if you have been at HOMENET before, I think there is not much new there. Oh.
Michael Abrahamson. So you're the only one who has an implementation that does anything like this at all. So we're the only ones here who care about doing this multi-subnet.
Hybrid proxy is actually in DNSSD, and there is quite considerable interest on that there because of the whole EDUCAUSE petition and everything, and that's part of this solution. But of course, how do you actually configure the set of hybrid proxies to be reachable is an answer can be either management or something bit more zero configuration, and the zero configuration is what we care about, so this is here.
Exactly. So what you're setting up here is the zero conf part
of
something that someone else has discovered how to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so that the complex definition of how DNS and MDNSD is actually converted to each other is defined in DNSSD, and we basically just have a normative reference to that.
I yield to the expert.
Stuart Cheshire, Apple. I just wanted to say I believe this is the right split of responsibilities, because the DNSSD working group is developing a technology or a solution that could be used in enterprise and higher education where there are administrators and it doesn't have to be zero configuration. What HOMENET is doing is taking that building block and saying, let's add the secret sauce to make the self-configuring so it becomes applicable for home networks as well as enterprise.
Yeah, so my point was just we only have to care about the zero conf part and not the rest of the machinery
and technically it's actually little conf optionally, so you can override the domain name to be your vanity domain name, and you can configure some things if you want, but the point is that it can be used as zero conf, but none of the other existing alternatives really work zero conf, so that's the unique selling feature of the solution.
Yeah, and as Marcus just mentioned, we do have a normative down reference in this to work that's going on in DNSSD, which we hope will progress sooner rather than later. Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Okay, thanks.
Stephen.
So this is the update for HNCP, DNCP, and PA. And next slide, please. So between the last IETF and this one, we had this draft split thing where we split up DNCP and HNCP, and also PA was a bit reorganized. The main reason for this was that we thought that DNCP had potential to be useful in other working groups, especially ANIMA or related. So we actually did a logical split of DNCP and HNCP here. DNCP is now the transport protocol, and HNCP is mostly the set of requirements for routers, the specific TLVs on top of a transport protocol, and specific security considerations for HOMENET use. And using that, you can see that DNCP is a generic transport for this. The specialty of DNCP over traditional like routing protocol based transport is that it actually has a lot of security features in there. It can be encrypted, it can use asymmetric authentication and encryption, and it's also still lightweight. We have 3 different trust management solutions in there, PSK based, a traditional PKI based, and also a consensus feature, which can be used to in a HOMENET solution to avoid having to deal with a CA and still have the advantage of using certificates. As for HNCP, this is now mainly a draft which you could potentially also put on top of other transport protocols if you really like to, but I don't think there's any interest in that at the moment, so we just stick with DNCP for now. Next slide, please. The second split that happened was for PA. Most of the HOMENET-specific parts of PA actually went into HNCP now, so we see IPv4 ULA generation, DHCP operation, RAs, and so on. This is now all done in HNCP, and PA just is like the bare metal generic operation, the algorithms and so on, and it's greatly simplified. So I'm just mentioning this here because Pierre doesn't do any update talk this IETF, so yeah, next slide, please. So, aside for the split, we have a few minor updates for DNCP. We had some issues with Keep Alive in the first version after the split, which is now fixed. We have simple read-only client support now for simple clients that just want to pull information out of there but do not want to speak the whole complexity of the protocol. And we added some optimization for dense links, which means that in special scenarios, which might not be that related to HOMENET, there's a lot of, well, sort of redundant information that we can get rid of, and this is one of the solutions. I don't want to go into details here because it's not that HOMENET related. So there's some open to-dos here. For DNCP, the biggest one is at the moment, we have this limit for node data that says each node can only publish 64K of data at the moment. We will have to see if we want to do something about that, if there is a demand for more. And furthermore, slightly related thing is we do not have any support for partial updates right now. So if a new node chooses to update its information, all neighboring nodes will have to get the whole information package again, and there's no partial update support. So if we think that we have enough data that would mandate increasing the size limit or adding a third layer to our Merkle tree, which means that we do split up the individual nodes information, support partial updates. If the working group thinks that is useful, we can add that feature. Maybe, I don't know, any comments for that? Okay, so we'll leave it open, maybe take it to the list again. For HNCP, we have updated RA handling, or Miko?
You can finish this slide.
Okay, so for HNCP, we have mainly two open points, which is first thing is fragmentation. And so at the moment, we sort of rely on link layer fragmentation of IPv6. And the big question is, do we still want to rely on that, or do we maybe want to switch to TCP or something like that? It's sort of ties into the 64K question again, and also mainly, even if we do the segmentation in the DNCP side, it doesn't fully solve the issue, because for the list of nodes that is exchanged when doing synchronization inside the HOMENET, there's still the limit that with like 1,500 kilobyte, if we assume that as MTU, then we can fit around 50 to 60 routers inside one of those packets. And if we have more routers in the home, then we have to rely on unicast link local fragmentation at the moment. So, and the second thing, I'm just mentioning stub routers here because this came up in like previous discussions on the mailing list, but I think this sort of ties into the routing protocol discussion, so I guess we'll have to leave it for later. Yeah, that's about that. I guess Mika?
Yeah, Michael Abrahamson. So I think a lot of these questions here are very good questions, and we need to decide what we're going to use HNCP for. I mean, I talked to you and some others what the trickle algorithm is good for and what it's not good for. And I think we definitely need to look into that and decide what information we're putting in here, how much information do we think is going to be generated, and then the outcome of that will decide where we need to go. Because, yeah, so we're talking about, for instance, if you have a lot of data and it's rapidly changing, then this is not a really good transport for that. It's good for a lot of other things. We need to decide what we're going to use it for and how much information we think is going to end up in there.
Yeah, I fully agree with you here. So I guess we should take it to the list then and see if we have any more comments on these issues.
Yeah, we should take that to the list, and probably also looking at Brian Carpenter here, take that to the Anima Group folks as well and see what their views are on their potential applicability of DNCP in their group.
Yeah, right.
And therefore how that affects the scaling features.
Yep, I agree. So next slide, please. So this is sort of our personal roadmap for this. So maybe if we can sort out the DNCP issues in the coming weeks, then we are sort of, from our personal point of view as editors or writers, are sort of ready to, solve any of the remaining issues. I guess HNCP will take a bit longer also because it sort of depends on the routing protocol discussion. And we also will do a reference implementation update very soon. We just delayed it a bit also because of all the discussions that will be going on today. So expect it soon, I guess. And there'll still be a demo of the recent stuff at Bits and Bytes on Thursday, I think. So, yeah. Talking about implementation next, please. So what we've seen in the reference implementation, we have updated it to DNCP 01 and HNCP 04. There have been some backwards compatible or incompatible changes regarding TLV formats and the transport protocol. The PA implementation is still a bit in testing. I hope we can get it ready soon, this week, next week probably. We have first implementation of DTLS support using OpenSSL now, so you can use security. PSK and trust consensus mechanism are implemented, so we can now use this in a secure manner or test it. And there was some input from, I think it was Ray Hunter, who found an interesting issue or configuration thing, which we've sorted out, which might have been affecting other people as well, which caused some lockouts. Yeah, Markus.
Markus Stenberg, just a brief comment. Actually, we have also PKI support implemented, so we actually support all the three authentication methods defined in the draft, but personally I don't believe in PKI in this context.
Yeah, especially because it would require manual CA management by some home user or administrator, and that is not, I think, not really a thing we want to see in HomeNet or that anyone will do. Yeah?
David Lampotter. In the DNCP draft, I'm missing a section on how to remove trust that has been bootstrapped somehow. And I do expect that this will be something a HomeNet user may want to do when someone maliciously, for example, added a node to the home network and they want to get it out again.
Are you talking about the trust consensus mechanism?
Well, there's a section on how trust is added, but I'm missing a section on how trust will be removed out again.
Oh, there's actually, for the PSK mechanism, okay, that's, yeah, okay, you just change, or you have to change PSK to revoke anything. For the trust consensus mechanism, it actually has features to say, I distrust this router, and this is like a consensus decision, so there's an algorithm in there where you can say you distrust a certain device, and then it's like removed from the network. Of course, because it's a consensus-based mechanism, this is for this particular mechanism, it is sort of a consenting removal because you can always attack it because it's consensus. But if you go the way and do the PKI thing, I think we don't have to define a special revocation mechanism here because you can simply revoke certificates or so. Well, I mean, yeah, that's why revocation is a bit problem, because you don't necessarily have timing information or can ensure that you get a CRA, but yeah. So that's always the problem with these mechanisms. If you like, in a bootstrapping protocol, revocation is a bit tricky.
Well, then my comment is that this may not be described in enough detail for other people to implement it properly.
Yeah. So, David, please put your concerns to the list so we can make sure they're actually addressed properly. Thank you.
Thanks. So what's in our to-do? Well, finish debugging PA, so hopefully we can get it done this week or next. And the IGP PSK mechanism, so maybe we'll tap into that issue later, but basically most of the IGPs do not support encryption or any form of asymmetric authentication, so HNCP has to do the job of managing a PSK for the IGP. We haven't yet implemented that, but I guess it's on the to-do somewhere, but it also requires support for an implementation that does all the HOMENET features plus supports this authentication mechanism. And next slide and last slide. For now, in one of the previous IETF meetings, the working group decided that we will get rid of IGP election, which was probably a bad mechanism after all, and I fully agree with that. But since we've already have the software upstream in OpenWRT and similar, so we have to find some way that we do not want to enforce any routing protocol onto our users right now, because the working group hasn't made a decision yet. So, and also we want to still keep interoperability for any hackfests or similar events that have been suggested on the mailing list. So what we do now in the reference implementation is we still keep part of an HNCP generated root mechanism in there for interoperability and for testing the performance of HNCP alone. In addition, we support one or more IGPs running in parallel without any requirements for adding TLVs to HNCP. You can just run them in parallel. I've written a draft about that and submitted it a few weeks ago, and you can see the mechanism in detail. It is backwards and forwards compatible, so it shouldn't be a problem. So I think that's it for the HNCP and DNCP updates. Any comments maybe?
Brian Carpenter. 2 points. Yes, we will be discussing synergy this afternoon in Anima. The second thing, I want to come back briefly to renumbering, because it seems that both the naming proposal and the prefix assignment proposal in their own way could handle renumbering quite elegantly. I think there's a missing link, which is a sort of renumbering event manager function. Because if renumbering occurs either voluntarily or imposed by an ISP, we don't want the home user to have to worry about it. So I'm suggesting a possible new work item at some point in the future with a revised charter, which is to see how that should be handled in a generic way.
Personally, I don't see this as an issue, because this is already solved with HNCP. There is no need to have renumbering events solved in a specific way, because HNCP just deals with delegated prefixes being added or removed from the ISP at any point in time, and does the appropriate reaction to that by, for example, deassigning prefixes or assigning a new prefix from a DP.
I didn't say we needed any new protocol. I think that there is a process that has to be gone through, right, a sequence of steps, and I think someone has to orchestrate those steps. And
well,
I don't know
who
it's going to do, who it's going to be.
Yeah, but I think you're treating renumbering as a sort of special event, and from our point of view, renumbering is just an event that is similar to adding or removing an ISP from the network. So this is like a very special case, but I think we have to take it to a more general level, and once we have solved, and I think we have solved that to a reasonable degree, that adding and removing ISPs works, then renumbering is just one thing that is solved on the side just because we have that.
Yeah, I thought you were right, but I think there are going to be side issues in renumbering. Whenever we've analyzed centralized renumbering, we found lots of side issues.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting we waste a lot of time on it now, but I think there is something in there.
Yeah, we will certainly need appropriate hooks between HNCP and the hybrid proxy and the name delegation system and whatever. I'm not convinced that that needs more other than description of those hooks in the existing appropriate documents.
Markus Tevari. Just a brief comment on this. Actually, I think the crucial part here is not what the home needs to do, but what the ISP needs to do. So ISP needs to do the renumbering gracefully and have two prefixes working for a time period, and not to just abrupt your prefix change from A to B and nothing in between. Given ISP behaves sensibly, there won't be a problem. But if ISP does not behave sensibly, bad things happen no matter what you do in your home network. So from my point of view, I would actually like to see a document telling ISPs, please be sensible if you do IPv6.
Yeah, I think adding to this, I mean, if there is like a fast renumbering event that we cannot control, we have to deprecate the addresses immediately and just have to try to recover in any sensible way. Okay.
Michael Richardson. So what I heard Brian Carpenter say is that he said there was a bunch of steps that need to happen, and maybe I didn't understand. Maybe I didn't quite understand. But what I'm perceiving him to say is that there's an entity that needs to take control of the bunch of steps, and I particularly in the what did he say, flash renumber scenario. I don't know what the list is, but I think it would be valuable to at least explore the list and to figure out if there is an act or a demon of some kind that we're missing here, and that maybe HNCP needs to elect one machine to be that. If we need a master renumbering, oracle or something in the home. I don't know that that's the case. I'm just saying that I think it's worth. I'm not at this point willing to accept the assertion that there is no role for a central thing there, but maybe there is. Maybe that's the correct assertion, and I think it's worth maybe going a little bit deeper into that, not in your document, but some other place. And I think the only thing is to say, well, we can elect. If we need to have one, we can elect someone to do it.
Yeah, but revisiting my earlier argumentation, I mean, in general, this is a distributed algorithm, so I don't think there needs to be a single instance for that. And in addition to that, I personally really fail to see the difference of a renumbering to adding or removing an ISP or an uplink in this case. So I don't personally I don't see the specialty.
I mostly think I agree with you. Okay, I think that that's the answer. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm not sure at this point that we have a widespread consensus view that everything you said that is the case. And so that's what I heard Brian is saying is that he thinks that there may be some pieces, some aspects that fall into a gap, and it might be that gap. You said, well, no, there's no gap because, actually the things always overlap. They don't ever do this. They always do this, and we can always arrange it to do this, and so nothing gets dropped to the floor, and it's good, right? And it's just not maybe it's just not obvious to everyone that that's the case for all the.
Okay, yes. I mean, we do appreciate input on that thing, and if you come up with a gap that is specific to renumbering but isn't covered by the ISP appearing disappearing thing, then yeah, I guess.
I think I'm pushing back on Brian, not on you. I'm pushing up on Brian to say, Yeah.
What Brian said is that we can't make it work. He didn't say that this is not the right way to do it. This is the right way to do it. Numbering is, number is no different from renumbering, the way I see it. I agree fully with. Go ahead.
I didn't intend to say we can't make it work. I meant to say I still have the feeling that it needs orchestration at some level, but it needs analysis. I didn't want to distract the working group with it right now. I just wanted to put it on people's think list, right? Because there might be future
do we
action.
have standing before us a set of volunteers to actually produce that analysis?
let me never get in the way of someone doing useless work. We cannot fix this, okay? If the ISP decides to change our prefix without giving us a grace period, there is zilch that we can do, period.
There's nothing we can do to stop the ISP doing that, but maybe there is something we can do to avoid pain to the user. That's the point, it's avoiding any pain to the user.
And this is the way to do it. This is the best that we have.
For the layer 3 issues and the naming issues, yes, but there are other issues in renaming, that's the point. We better not talk about it anymore right here, but I'm going to think about it and maybe send a message to the list.
I guess on a less serious note, I guess you could write a module that as soon as it detects flash renumbering, writes an email to the support of your ISP and make bad things happen.
Michael Abrams. So I just want to point out that there are countries in the world where the general population believe that changing the address regularly is something in their own interest. This is not the ISP being stupid. This is actually people being something.
No, I think
but it's actually customer demand.
No,
so
I think we have to differentiate between flash renumbering and graceful renumbering.
Yes, so as long as we describe, it would be nice perhaps to have some text on this to have a temporal overlap, graceful renumbering, and how that's supposed to work, because that's something we absolutely want to support. And yeah.
But I think that is a bit out of scope for us here, and it's more like something for RIBE or I don't know.
Let's cut the line off to Barbara on this one.
You can handle non-flash renumbering today, right?
Yeah, I mean we do that already, right? So
Eric, I'll cut the line.
We need to find somebody find an ISP architecture that supports non-flash renumbering. When we have that, when you find an ISP that's able to do that, then we can talk about it. Because right now they point one route at one VLAN, and when the lease changes, they change.
Yeah, but just saying then, if there's like graceful renumbering, it is like for us like one new ISP coming up and the old one like disappearing, sort of.
Yeah, that's fine. It could be that we just need some text describing this and just an operational, example description.
Okay, sure.
Alex Petrescu. I wanted to comment on an earlier comment about when the ISP changes the address, then the HomeNet has nothing to say or nothing to do. I know a different situation where the IP address and the IPv6 prefix is actually a contractual matter. So I buy it from my ISP, and the ISP will deliver this particular address and this particular prefix to me. If it wants to change, it will have to ask me whether I agree that changement. Okay. So this is a situation where renumbering could be more than just protocol matters.
We cannot solve commercial matters with technical solutions.
Certainly. Yeah, but it's not a decision from the ISP that the end user must abide. It could be vice versa. Okay, it could even be that the HomeNet would have a prefix that it decides by itself and asks the ISP to route that prefix.
But I think in general, I think we agree that the ISP delegates prefixes using DHCPv6 for the most.
No.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay, you can something else.
In the HomeNet world, we do.
Yeah,
yes.
In the HomeNet world we do, and in the HomeNet world then DHCPv6, the server is like your master and the client is your slave, and you have to do what the server says.
Okay, so you have some work to do to persuade many ISPs to know that.
I think take it to DHC instead. It would be a good issue.
Okay, last word on this.
Barbara Stark, AT&T. We have a lot of 6RD, and a lot of it's over PPPoE. That PPPoE link goes down every now and then, and when it comes back up, you've got a new IPv4 address, you've got a new IPv6 prefix. There's a lot of customers like this. Please don't say that ISP is being irresponsible unless you want all of this IPv6 to go away that's on that.
Yeah, just reiterating, I mean, from the home point of view, we can maybe complain, but there's really nothing we can do about it.
Okay, thank you. Margaret. Okay.
That's it for me, sir.
So at the last meeting, we talked about routing protocol selection for HOMENET, and there was a lot of discussion about what routing protocol it made sense to use, and the two that were discussed the most were ISIS and Babel, and I took the action item from that meeting to work on a comparison document between the two, and Julius Krovacek and Christian Hops worked with me there, the top experts in those two protocols, to put together a document to inform the group of the differences between the protocols so that we can make a well-informed decision about which one to use. So next slide. So we wrote a document. How many people here have read the document? Pretty good. It compares Babel and ISIS based on criteria that we thought were pertinent to HOMENET based on discussion on the list and whatever knowledge we have of HOMENET. It's intended to aid the working group in making a well-informed decision. The document itself does not make a recommendation or reach a conclusion. It just contains information. As I said, the Babel information came from Julius. The ISI information came from Chris Hops. Julius wrote the only Babel implementation and the spec. Chris Hops is the chair of ISIS and has done one of the implementations. These are very well-informed people about these protocols. It's not a consensus document of any group, including the authors. In many cases, one of the experts has provided information. We haven't reached consensus on that information in any way. It's really just an informative document. Next slide. We considered a set of ISI specifications in the document. The base spec, the ISI over IP spec, for TCP/IP spec, the traffic engineering extensions, and the IPv6 with ISIS, all of which are standards track documents in the IETF and very well-established protocols, and then a couple of more recent extensions, the auto-configuration extension and the source-specific routing extension, both of which are still individual drafts. Next slide. For Babel, we considered the base protocol specification, which is an experimental RFC, an extension mechanism that Julius has written up in a draft, and source-specific routing, which is available in a draft with further explanation at that URL. Next slide. So this presentation and the document focus on key differences between the protocol. All right, there were a lot of criteria discussed in the document about which the two protocols were largely equivalent, and I have not really included those in this presentation because they're not interesting in terms of making a choice. So if there are certain criteria that aren't listed here, it's not that we didn't consider them, it's that we didn't consider them to be a key difference between the two protocols. So next slide. One of the differences between the protocols is how they support link metrics. Both of the protocols have sufficiently large metrics, okay, 16 and 24 bits each. Neither one of them has a cripplingly small metric, but Babel has the ability to automatically calculate metrics based on multiple sources of information about the link. And the ones that I know of are whether it's wireless or wired, what its packet loss characteristics are, its latency, and also radio interference. Whereas ISIS it really kind of has a notion of configured metrics, and so it'll use the default metric on a link unless it's configured to use a different metric on the link. So in an auto-configured network, it would use all the default metric. It's at least theoretically possible that support for dynamic link metrics could be added to ISIS, and the ISIS working group has expressed interest in working on things that HOMENET might need and might be willing to work on this. It was non-trivial to do it in Babel, though, and while ISIS could leverage some of the work done in Babel, there might have to be work on a new stability algorithm because ISIS has different traffic associated with the routing protocol than Babel does. Next slide. Multicast routing. ISI has support for multicast metrics and Babel does not. This is a difference. Whether or not it matters to the HOMENET working group is a matter of question, because we haven't actually said that we require multicast routing for HOMENET. And also, some people believe it would be better to run a separate multicast routing protocol if and when we do multicast routing in HOMENET. So, you can have your own opinions on that subject. Next slide. Encapsulation. Babel is an IP-based protocol, so it runs over IP, and then, therefore, over anything that IP runs on. ISIS runs directly over the link layer protocol, which means that it has to have some sort of access to raw sockets on Unix or some similar concept on other types of systems and architectures. And it also means that there may be some special work needed if we wanted ISIS to run over PPP, PPPoE, GRE, and maybe Zigbee links, because IP over Zigbee was tricky to do. And so if you took out the IP and you want to put ISIS in there, you're going to have probably similar work to do. May be able to leverage what was done for IP, but it's not clear. Next slide. Resource exhaustion behavior. The protocols are different in this regard. Both of them have capabilities to handle resource exhaustion. In the Babel case, they will discard routes in order to keep the table small enough for the available space. They discard redundant routes first, then they just discard other routes, and the router will continue to work properly as long as the default route is not discarded. In the current implementation, there's no prioritization of the default route to prevent it from being discarded, but probably not too hard to add. Yes?
On the previous slide, it says you need to do something special with GRE. GRE uses the ether type as the protocol identifier, and ISIS is an ether type, so you don't need to do any work.
Okay, thank you. So one question here is how important this difference is. And ISIS, instead of doing some sort of back off on the table like that, because it's sending the link state and throwing away parts of the link state would not have the preferred results, will actually, when an ISIS router hits overload, it will send an overload indication, which basically makes other ISIS routers treat it as a destination-only router, or a stub router is the word we've been using here in HOMENET. And the question is really, though, even though these two behaviors are different, which one is better? Well, I don't know. And is it really important? Because are we likely to actually be hitting resource limits, given that most of the resource-limited devices are going to be stub routers anyway, and are like a typical home router, Linksys type, OpenWRT type router is really going to have more than adequate resources to hold the routing table for a typical home. Like, this may not turn out to be an important difference. Yes?
I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about the previous slide, but I also had a comment about this slide. So I think this is actually, maybe this is a new part from the previous version that this includes this information, but I think this is a really interesting kind of thing, and I don't actually think that, exactly how much resources it are, but I think that the moment you say, we have a way of dealing with running out of resources, then the answer may be, that's really cool, now I can make my watch into a router. Okay, and so rather than saying, we have lots of resources, I think it's exactly the Moore's Law thing that says, that's great, now I can have more routers that are simpler in more places.
Yeah, but we've talked mostly in HOMENET about the notion that on the simple devices, and depends what kind of watch you own, because some of them are not, but on the simpler devices, we would run a stub router anyway. And a stub router has a notion of a default. It does not have a large routing table. And so it wouldn't fall into this category where you're going to have a growing routing table and run out of resources. We're thinking, at least discussion has been, that we would only be running a full routing table on CPE and larger devices that are plugged into a wall or whatever, and that the smaller devices, the thermostats, the watches, et cetera, would be stub routers at best.
Right, but I'm saying that I think the argument will become reversed. It will become, I don't need to be a stub router only because I can gracefully run out of resources. Therefore, I can do something useful. So why don't I do something useful? I have 4 extra routes that do something, and that's all I could accommodate. And then I could say I'm done. That would be interesting.
If you had a way to select the correct 4 routes, that would be interesting.
So that's why
neither one of these protocols has a way to select the correct 4 routes. In fact,
okay.
Babel will throw away its default route if that happens to be the oldest route that is hanging around. That could be fixed, the default route, but you still, it's not using an intelligent algorithm to decide which routes are the most important to keep. So
okay, so they're equally stupid, is what I think.
They're kind of both equally stupid, but and they're both equally good. I mean, neither one of them just crashes when it runs out of resources. But probably we're going to suggest running a stub router on anything that might run out of resources if it had to hold the whole routing table for the home, in which case it kind of becomes a moot point how it would fail if it failed.
So about the previous slide with ISIS and Ethernet, I heard yesterday from authoritative source that there is a variant of ISIS that apparently does run over IP. It's not common, and I was kind of excited to hear that, because that kind of, for me, removes most of that problem. But I don't know to what extent that's a real thing or not.
I can run Ethernet over IP, so I can run ISIS over that.
No,
but I don't know that it's a good idea.
I know, but I don't know. But so that's what Aaliyah told me yesterday, was that there was a variant.
Yeah, I don't believe there's an open source implementation of it, or I mean.
Well, if there's a specification that is not in 0.0, then I think that's useful to know.
I'm not familiar with it, so.
Okay.
And neither was apparently Christian, because he didn't bring it up. So, Peter.
Okay. So okay. So my name is
Peter. Before you start, we'd kind of like the presentation to keep flowing a bit, so please keep your questions very brief and cut the line where you are now.
I actually had another comment, but I can answer them. There is an ISIS over IP. It was done to run ISIS over ATM, because when they were doing it with Mac, the spaghetti killed their network. So we actually did that. But what I wanted to say is that the number of routes is a function of exceptions. And exceptions include policies here. And so the number of routes in the home is going to grow. When I got into this business, we had 240 routes in the total internet, and now we have, 700,000. So, and if you look at the routes, you can be asked yourself, why do we have it? So we are designing something for the future. Please keep that in mind, okay? And we are going to live with this for 15 years or so, and those boxes are going to be everywhere.
Yeah, if we could just take clarifying questions during the presentation. There is like an hour planned for discussion after this presentation. Exactly. Did you have a clarifying question?
It was a clarifying point, but maybe it's different.
Okay.
But yes, as Margaret says, clarifying questions only now, please. We've got a lot of time set aside for discussion afterwards.
Jan Svarkas, just a comment. ISIS runs smoothly over Ethernet. There is specification for that, and implementations, deployments as well.
Okay, thank you. A topic that came up with much discussion at the last Home Network Group meeting was how these 2 protocols perform over 802.11. Babel has been optimized to run over 802.11 networks. Control traffic is optimized for lossy variable bandwidth links. And so it's more important control traffic is sent without a delay, other traffic is sent with a delay. And there's a lot of detail in the document about our document, but also in the Babel document about how it's optimized for 802.11. Probably most importantly to us, it works with IBSS links. I don't remember what IBSS stands for, but what it means is there's non-transitive communication. All right, so and a lot of the mobile ad hoc networks have this capability or have this quality. Zigbee networks can have this quality where there's non-transitive communication. So I can't reach all of the nodes on the link, but I can reach one of them. And that node can reach others that it thinks are on its own local link. And the communication is not transitive the way we view it. We have a tendency to design protocols for Ethernet, even though most of us are using Wi-Fi, and then they don't work as well as you might like on some of the more ad hoc wireless networks, the short-range wireless networks, because they don't have the same properties. Nodes' reachability to each other varies by things like whether or not I carry a Coke can through my house, cocans are very disruptive to a lot of radio signals. So Babel has been made to work on those types of links, and ISIS has not. The DIS and pseudo-node optimization functions assume that the set of nodes you can reach and the nodes that those nodes can reach directly is always the same set. You know, that there's no, like if I can reach node B, then all the nodes I can reach directly and all the nodes that node B can reach directly are the same set of nodes. But that's not true on a lot of radio networks. I can reach B, B can reach C, but I can't reach C, by a single hop. And so that can cause a lot of problems with algorithms that assume, you can kind of multicast and reach everybody who can reach everybody else, right? And so ISIS has not been designed to work on those links, and they have issues on those links. So that's something that we would need to look into if we want to actually be able to run ISIS across those sort of radio links. Now, we haven't really been talking about that, right? We've been talking about using a stub router at the edge of those networks and then using their own internal routing protocols or whatever, like Ripple. Whether or not Ripple's a routing protocol is actually what I'm dithering about here, but they've used their own protocols internally to direct traffic around the Zigbee network, okay? And if that's the way we want to go, then this may not matter. But if we're picturing our routing protocol running across those sorts of networks, this may be an important point. Next slide. So there were the kind of technical differences between the protocols. Yes?
Alex Petrescu. On the previous slide, well, let me formulate this as a clarification. Is IBSS standing for Independent Basic Service Set or as a Infrastructure Basic Service Set?
I don't know what I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking me what IBSS stands for? Yeah. I don't know what IBSS stands for. Stands for. I said that when I came to it in the slide. I don't remember what it stands for. Someone could look it up if they like.
I formulated this as a clarification. The
other independent, it stands for.
Independent. Okay, thank you. The other thing is that, after some experience with Babel, and hello to Julius, who may be listening to us, we find it a very valuable routing protocol. On the other hand, we think there is still some work to do with Babel to really make it work on these IBSS ad hoc networks. These networks are very special, and there is some document describing them in the int area working group, and there is some discussion in the int area. Charles Perkins and Emmanuel Baccelli wrote a document about this behavior of transitivity A, B, and C, and things like that. So at this point, I don't know about ISIS. I think Babel is an attempt to work well on it, but in real deployment scenarios with robots in some special setting, Babel has its own faults, and it breaks also in sometimes. Okay.
So let's try to keep to clarifying questions. I mean, the question about what is IBSS, that's a clarifying question. But
my clarifying question is the following: do you think Babel works very well in these IBSS environments?
First off, I am in no way a universal expert on Babel. Okay, so you know better than I. So let's.
Somebody in the room thinks that Babel works very good in these environments.
Okay, so let's just draw that line there. I mean, clearly the point is made that there appears to be some discrepancy between the theory and the practice of how well Babel works with IBSS, and that point is well made. Thank you.
By the way, Julius points out that he can provide peer-reviewed references regarding the behavior of Babel on IBSS networks.
I mean, some of the rest of this presentation actually gets to that kind of issue, and so, maybe when I'm done with the presentation, if you want to stand up and talk about Babel some more, that would be a good thing. Aaliyah?
Can you go to the next slide, please?
I haven't presented this slide yet.
Right, I was expecting it to happen while I was walking over.
I have a lot of slides left. ISIS is documented in standards track RFCs. Okay, the main ones, the RFCs I listed, all standards track IETF RFCs put together by an IETF working group and published through the IETF process. There are some extensions that are drafts, but we've been told by the ISIS working group chair, and there's apparently been some discussion in ISIS that they would be willing to, try to accelerate that work for us if we need it to use this in HomeNet. Babel is documented in individual submission experimental RFCs. They have not been through the IETF review process. There is no IETF working group, and there is currently no well-understood process for downrefing to a non-IETF generated RFC. We can downref to an IETF informational or downref to an IETF experimental, but it's not clear the ISG would allow us to downref to an individually submitted experimental RFC, especially, and I don't mean this as an insult, given the document quality of Babel. It's underspecified by IETF standards. So this may be a real serious problem for the group. So, Aaliyah?
Hi, Aaliyah Atlas, Routing AD. Right, yes, we're not doing a downdraft to this. That will not be allowed. But if, after appropriate decision, if Babel is the protocol that is necessary, then we will have a working group in routing to do it. But that requires all of the standard handing over of control, etc., that is implied.
And 2+ years to standardize it.
No, I kicked my working groups harder than that.
So how long do you think? A year and a half? I mean, it's not a 3-month process to standardize a routing protocol, right? I mean, it's not ready to be standardized. No. I don't know if you've read it, but it needs work.
Sorry. Yes, I will. The question was, can't we just wave a magic wand and make it experimental? No, we need the consensus process. It needs to be IETF consensus. As I have not read the Babel informational RFC myself yet, but I believe Margaret when she says it is underspecified. I understand that there's some really cool technology in it, and if that's really needed to really meet the actual routing requirements, but we need to actually have it become a standard, not pretend.
Okay. There is one other path, which could be that some of us, including Julius, could get together, specify it more completely, and ask a local routing AD to sponsor it. But that would have to presume that the IETF would not scream in last call.
We're getting into discussion again here rather than clarification, and obviously we will be giving you plenty of time, Elliot, to put through the routing area viewpoint on this when we get to the discussion points.
Absolutely. I just wanted to clarify that it is a serious problem.
Clarification question on point 1. Is there consensus that said ISIS RFCs are a sufficiently specified source of information to produce a complete implementation?
Yes, there are actually several. There are actually 3 open source implementations of ISIS and numerous proprietary ones that are known to interoperate in the wild.
That's not the question. The question is, if you only read the RFCs, is that enough information to produce a complete ISIS implementation? That was the question. Who are you and what did you say?
Is that true of anything we ever write? I don't know.
Are you asking the question, do you need to get an ISO document to write it? Yes.
Yeah. So the answer was you need to get an ISO document to implement ISIS correctly. Chris Hobbs.
But that particular ISO document is actually published as an RFC.
David Lamparter. Clarification about the IETF working group on Babel. I do believe the working group exists. It should be managed, but the working group is kind of half dead, so Babel didn't go through the existing working group. That would have been the appropriate working group. That's slightly different.
So we do, it's just not on the slide, right? This is Chris Hobbs again, DT. So it is in the document. Right? It's just not on the slide. It's not like we're hiding it.
Yeah, I mean, the first slide that I said listed the base ISIS spec and the ISO spec number for it.
Yeah, I just want to comment on this question of individual submissions and different types of RFCs. So I think it's actually two different cases. So if you have a situation where everyone agrees that you have stable technology that works very well, upgrading its status, that's a reasonably short task that we could do in a reasonable amount of time. If, on the other hand, the case is that you actually need to do some technical work and enhance it somehow to get to that level that everyone agrees that that's a reasonable protocol, then that takes longer. And you need to figure out which case we have here. And I guess you were saying we have the latter case.
In my opinion, I mean, I'm not the world's, I don't get to decide. I'm not the IETF chair or anything. Peter?
I'm Peter Lofgren.
Last word on this, please.
I think that we are mixing something. What I hear is that we need an adaptation layer to speak IP packets over strange things. And this case happens to be wireless with hidden nodes, and we did a lot of research on that in the 80s, by the way. We need an adaptation layer to make things run over it. It's like routing protocols should be media independent the way the IETF protocols are laid out. So I think we're mixing things up and down and left and right here. And by the way, this IEEE thing you're referring to, the wireless thing, is that an RFC or is that an IEEE standard?
IEEE 802.11 is Wi-Fi.
Can we use that in the IETF because it's not an RFC?
Okay, don't be a troublemaker. Can we go to the next slide? Implementation status. There are multiple interoperable implementations of ISIS independent implementations. There are 3 open source implementations that I'm aware of anyway. Auto ISIS, which is written in the language Erlang, which makes it perhaps not suitable for use on restricted nodes or really kind of anything we probably want to put in the home. But there's also this alpha quality Quagga implementation written in C. And then there's a stub implementation called Tiny ISIS, which is also written in C, I think by Chris. But no. And there are multiple proprietary implementations. This protocol's been around and running on corporate networks for a long time. There are 2 open source implementations of Babel that I'm aware of. One is BabelD, written in C. One is SBabelD, that's the stub implementation, written in C. While they're separate implementations, they are not independent because they were written by the same person, Julius, who also is the person who wrote the specification. There are no proprietary implementations that we, the authors, aka Julius, are aware of.
David Lampotter. The C implementation in Quagga is used in production networks. Please at least call it beta.
Yeah, well, I know that the Quagga website claims it's alpha quality.
I forgot to update that.
Okay, thank you. Go update it. Thank you.
This is Peter Lofgren again. I'm still getting confused about some things here, but the language used to program something, as long as the tools is also public domain and all the compilers are public domain and everything.
Next slide, please. It's 17 megabytes to run the Erlang implementation. That's why it's probably unsuitable for most of our purposes, okay?
Margaret, the DoD sponsored standard when we did TCP was written in BCPL.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, I'm not talking about what can make it go to proposed standard or draft standard. I'm talking about what can we use in a HomeNet device. And we've got here some open source implementations. We don't have the Quagga implementation up here because we weren't able to get sizes for it. So if you can get sizes for it, it might be great to email them to the list because it would give us a better data point of a full ISIS implementation. But we've got the full BabelD implementation. You can see the sizes here. It needs 129 KB installed size and about 300 KB to run. Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say, please understand that the Erlang comparison is apples and oranges.
Yeah, well, that's why I was mentioning that.
It would be great now that we know that it's beta quality.
It'd be great to get the Quagga numbers if we can get them. The stub Babel implementation, 13K, the code size basically, and to run it you need about 200K. And then the auto ISIS is not very indicative. We don't believe ISIS is I don't even know the proportion there, that much bigger than Babel, but the numbers are there because it was written in Erlang, and Erlang does not build small code. And then Tiny ISIS, you can see, is a more real comparison with SBabelD. They're both stub implementations. We've got 17K installed size and about 330K to run. If that proportion holds, we could say, well, ISIS might be in the area of 1.5 times the size of Babel, but we don't really know for a full implementation. So if we could get the Quagga numbers, that would help. So next slide. Deployment status. ISIS is a very widely deployed protocol in managed networks. Okay, it has little or no deployment in unmanaged networks right now. The AutoComp stuff is new, so there are some new parts that we would have to use to make it work in home nets. And the source-specific routing has not been deployed yet either. Babel is much less widely deployed. Its deployment status is a little bit unclear because it's included in CERO, WRT, CERO, I'm not sure how you say that, and it's an optional package for OpenWRT, but we know it's not getting much use, widespread use at this point. But it does have some deployment of its source-specific Babel, which ISIS does not have. Next slide. So there's been a lot of feedback on the list on this document. Not all of it is reflected in the most recent version, but thank you. And really the discussion at this point shouldn't be about, in my opinion, about this document so much as about the routing protocols themselves. If you have specific questions on the document, you can send them, or come up to the mic and ask them. But I think that we want to then transition to a discussion of the routing protocols. There are a couple questions that were still open on the document. Should we add OSPF? And do we need an improved section on security? And if the working group does not make a decision today, we can talk about whether that stuff would be helpful. But I think it's hope that we'll make a decision in a time frame that really kind of makes that all a moot point. Yes?
Pascal Hubert, clarification question here. Do you make the strong assumption that there is only one routing protocol in the home?
We made that decision last time, that there would be one HomeNet routing protocol, sort of.
The fact that you have one HomeNet routing protocol doesn't mean that you don't have stuff.
I mean, we assume Ripple will run on Zigbee probably. I mean, we talk about treating that like a stub network as far as the HomeNet routing protocol. So, I mean, it depends what you mean.
What I'm getting at is redistribution. If you have a gateway of some sort which attaches an IoT network, such as a Ripple-based network, to your home network, then you also need to think at, how do I redistribute my IoT protocol into my core protocol?
This is covered in the architecture document.
The point I'm making is, if you look at Babel, it is incredibly similar to Ripple, whether you call Ripple a routing protocol or not. Ripple does exactly the same inheritance from EHRP and DSDV as Babel does. And then we solve the number of files that you listed there. We solve, or you don't actually, like the multiple advertisers for the same prefix. We solve how to deal with all those link metrics of different sorts with objective functions that Babel is still missing but could have. We solve the adaptability to radios and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, I understand.
Why is not Ripple there? Maybe
I understand, but we are kind of, I don't know, the previous discussion, which has happened over multiple working group meetings and on the list, has sort of assumed, and I mean, maybe it's the wrong decision, but has sort of assumed that we would run Ripple on like the Zigbee networks, the low power wireless network type areas, and that we would treat that as a stub network with respect to the higher level, more traditional routing protocol.
That's correct.
And so, we'd have one or more gateways going into that
Babel,
area.
which is similar to Ripple, and then which is experimental, cannot be done Raft, etc. And Ripple.
So Pascal, are you proposing that we use Ripple for the whole HomeNet instead of Babel? Is that what you're saying?
Or do something on Babel to make it look like Ripple or inherit. I mean, yes, but Ripple would work
sounds like
fine
a
at
research
home.
project.
Yes, that would work, certainly.
The the position we reached at the last meeting was that we only had 2 viable candidates. If somebody wanted to propose Ripple, that was always an open option at the time. I'm afraid at this point that ship has sailed.
David Lampeter. I think I'm seeing Pascal's point a little bit differently. I think we need to look at mesh networks the same way we look at ZigBee low power stuff. But the problem is, behind the mesh network there can be more bits of the whole net, so we can't really treat it like a stub network. I do think it might be useful to draw a line and say, no, we are not including the generic mesh in the home net. And I don't think we said that we would do that.
David, we actually, in the HomeNet architecture document, it explicitly says that those types of networks are stub networks and that we will not route HomeNet traffic over them.
Over mesh in general?
Yeah, no, partially because HNCP and so forth are too much of a bandwidth hog to run over those networks. So there's reasons.
Yeah, low power lossy networks.
Yeah.
There's a difference between mesh and low power. They're not mutually exclusive.
Right. Yeah, we didn't exclude mesh networks, but we did exclude LLNs.
Yeah, so the question is, what do we do about high power mesh networks?
Can we just do my last slide, which basically says nothing, and then I can, get up and argue?
Yes, absolutely. My intention.
So, if anybody has any feedback on this document, they should send it to the HomeNet working group. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. And I'd like to extend our sincere thanks again to Margaret and Julius and to Christian for the very good work they did on this document. Yeah, that was very much appreciated. And I shall probably if he doesn't mind, let Ted set the scene here now as our AD and in Mark's absence. And given in the light of a lot of discussions going on in the background with various other ADs and the ISG.
So this is a real morass, and I don't actually know how we're going to get through it, but we have to get through it. I see people walking up to the microphone kind of swaggering a little bit as if they're going to say something, which everybody always does. I would like people to be really, really careful what you say at the microphone, not in the sense that, oh my God, you said something bad, but in the sense that don't say something useless. We don't have a lot of time here, so please don't get up and just say something that really doesn't matter and isn't going to help us to move this discussion forward. What I'd like to do, given the amount of time we have a little under 45 minutes, I would like to try to figure out what issues we actually need to debate. And the issues that I think are kind of at the top of the list, not in necessarily order of importance, are the transitivity question. Do we need transitivity? Do we need support for cases where we don't have transitivity or not? I think the answer to that was no, but that's still a little bit of an open question in my mind. Optimization for lossy links, which is something that seems to be a feature of Babel and not of ISIS. And then the consensus process, if we were to choose Babel, how would we get to how would we get to the point where we actually were able to deploy something? So before we get into those issues, I'd like to ask if anybody else has any other high-level issues that they think we really need to talk about. Okay, so we've got a couple people in the line. Could you guys step forward and say what those issues are, briefly?
Lorenzo Colletti, I think we need to decide non-technical issues primarily. We primarily need to decide how long we're willing to wait to make it.
Okay, that's the third item that I brought up.
Okay, yeah.
Stephen Bart, and I want to point out that we should probably think about how big is our future HomeNet. Are there really many redundant links in the home network? And I think these generic questions really affect these things.
So a clarifying question. Do you think that one of the protocols differs on that point? That if we chose Babel that it would fail, and if we chose ISIS it would work, or vice versa?
No,
So if you don't think that, then we don't need to talk about it. Because, no, seriously, we can't talk about stuff that we don't need to talk about.
This is from Julius. regarding optimization for lossy links. More generally, optimization for networks that have links of varying quality, not only loss,
Okay.
but
That's a good
bandwidth is very
clarification.
variable in home nets. And it's actually swap bandwidth and throughput.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's cover these issues in order. Oh, we have another one, Ross?
Yeah, I got up because I thought I had an issue that we should worry about. Now, I'm not sure this might be less of an issue in homes than it is in bigger networks, but certainly in bigger networks over the years, just the dynamics of how routing protocols behave when there are changes have been something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, convergence has been addressed in the document already.
Right.
And I think the conclusion was that they're not significantly different.
So again, just to clarify, do you think are you aware of a difference between Babel and ISIS with respect to convergence?
I'm not. I don't know Babel well enough.
All right.
That's covered in the document, and I believe that all the authors of the document agreed that both protocols have fast convergence time and that the differences are not material.
Okay.
If Julius or Chris wants to get up and disagree with me, they can feel free to do so.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is actually that was a really good question, Ross, in the sense that this is exactly the kind of thing that we need to winnow it down to just the things we need to talk about.
So right. So I presented the ISIS and Julius presented the Babel convergence times, right? Part of I think what Ali has said earlier though is that of course I'm counting on those numbers being correct and for that to be the case, there are peer-reviewed stuff or whatever, but we would want it in front of the IETF.
Right, so that would be part of the whole consensus on Babel process if we get to that.
I'm not sure if what I have as a topic is covered by what I think was originally your third topic, but I have read all of the documents that were here, and I think I have some notion of how much work would be needed to make ISIS useful for us, how much work would be needed to make Babel useful for us, and I think we need to practically consider that factor.
Okay, so that's a really good clarification. So we need to figure out how much, not just what work there is to do with respect to Babel, but also supposing we chose ISIS, what work would be required there?
Right, because there is some work required there in terms of those two drafts that we considered that have not been put forward, and the fact that we probably would want to do at least one other piece of work, which is to do the lossy link optimization stuff for ISIS as well. Mm-hmm. But that might be less work than getting Babel to be a referenceable document. It's not just about a reference. It's not just about the bureaucracy, but actually being at the level of completeness and quality that we expect in an IETF standard.
Right. Okay, so any more high-level issues that we need that would help us to differentiate between the protocols? I'm not seeing any enthusiasm for that question. David?
David Lampeter. I do think we need to get an answer to whether mesh networks are part of the domain of this single. Sorry? Oh, okay.
What was that, Michael?
I said it was in your list, and that's why I'm standing here.
Okay.
So this stuff is going to go into $30 home routers, right? So I think, are we willing to say that something that doesn't fit into ROM-J just doesn't get to be chosen? Are we willing to say that?
Do we have the ability to make that realistically? Do we really think that we can make that determination here? I mean, because we don't actually know how big the Quagga implementation is.
David is going to get us numbers in 5 minutes.
Okay.
But my point is, do we have that ability? But because if we don't, right, we can keep talking about big iron routing protocols, and we can say, oh well, ISIS works, but if there's no implementation, all we're doing is setting ourselves up for waiting years. The problem here is
okay. We actually So your point is that we need to figure out. We need to get David's answer. Okay.
But that was one of the questions. Are we willing to say if it doesn't fit in some constrained device, then it doesn't? Then no matter what, we're going to reject it. That's a question that I think we should consider.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how we. I mean, no. So here's the thing. What I'm trying to get at with these bullet points is, which I guess really we ought to have on the screen.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Can I just steal your?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So actually,
that's all right.
yeah, it really doesn't work.
So one of the things on the slide was about OSPF. Is that still open? I mean, or is
no.
the routing list the routing choices are closed at ISIS and Babel?
We would have to have a pretty strong argument for reopening that.
Yeah, that's what I was asking though. Would that be one of the things that would be discussed?
Yeah, I mean, we can't 100% say absolutely ruled out, but it's got to be a very, very strong case to reopen that argument at this point.
In the spirit of the earlier sort of time question, if we sit on ourselves for a year trying to choose between Babel and ISIS, it is possible that the industry will implement HNC. Okay? Now, we can say that that's dumb and that they shouldn't do it and all this stuff, but all it will make us is irrelevant. So I guess, again...
So you're saying that we should plan for failure?
I'm saying, should we consider the alternative that is actually just running HNCP because it is running code? Okay? Have we already ruled that out? And how long?
Okay, Lorenzo, these are the kinds of questions that I would really like us to not ask. I will answer your question briefly, but I think the answer is obvious, and I don't know why you're even asking. The answer is that would be a standardization process, which would have to go through the same process as if we were to standardize Babel, and therefore it's not going to save time.
It's a working group document.
It is a working group document in this working group, which would have to get consensus in the routing area, and that would be a process. Because now you're making it into a routing protocol.
So
you see the problem?
What would actually happen is that a bunch of people will get into a room and define the TLVs that you need to do routing, and then they would take those TLVs and implement the routing protocol, which already exists, is already running code, and there's a draft edit. They implement that, and then 5 years later we come up and say, oh, we've chosen, Apple, and nothing happens. Okay, so I'm just saying that's a fairly scenario. So we should consider the reality of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps we could get some guidance from Alia on exactly where the routing folks would stand if the topology flooding information that's already built into HNCP happened to effectively allow that to be used for routing.
The reason, I don't think we should revisit every discussion we've had in the past. The reason we're having this discussion is we decided that we did not want to go the route of the HOMENET working group trying to specify its own routing protocol. We could try to specify our own routing protocol, then we'd have to move to routing, and they'd make us write a routing protocol. Routing protocols have to go through pretty rigorous stuff before they get published. We can't just make a routing protocol here.
Yeah, absolutely. It is out of our charter to devise a routing protocol. It happens that HNCP shares many characteristics with the routing protocol. I'd quite like to hear Alia's view on whether that, what side of that line does she think we would stand?
We can do it. We can use HNCP for routing, and I'm afraid people will do it. And I think here the issue we have a timing issue. It's like we have a beauty contest between two routing protocols. People are trying to kill each other not to see the other routing protocol being chosen, and both have specifications issue and implementation issues. The Babel is not specified correctly, but we have a perfect implementation, and the ISIS is.
May I point out the reason why we have a timing problem is because people insist upon having really long, detailed conversations about things that we can't change.
Okay, let me finish, please. Let me finish. I think we are.
Right.
Yeah, I think we are not going to make it right. I think we are going to, we either won't be able to make a decision or it will be wrong. So my point is, I think I never heard somebody saying that before, but my point is, even if we choose one, we may be wrong. So
yes.
Even if we choose one, we need to be able to make it right later, right? That's the thing. We need a mechanism to a different routing protocol later.
Please. We don't have time to rat hole on every single possible way that this could go wrong. What we're trying to do here is make a decision as to whether we're going to adopt Babel or whether we're going to adopt ISIS.
And maybe the working group doesn't want that.
Well, the working group had a consensus to do that in Honolulu.
You can't force the working group to make a decision.
So if the working group is going to not go along with that consensus, which is a legitimate thing that the working group can do, then what that means is that we're going to have to revisit the consensus, and that is what we have done in multiple IETFs already. So what you're proposing to do is actually exactly the thing that's causing us to fail.
I'm just saying that we can choose one, but we need to be able to choose another one in 5 years, 10 years when we discover.
Well, that's fine. Nobody's saying we can't. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Alia?
If it's doing routing, it's the routing protocol.
Right.
Okay. This is not a special case of Babel versus other things. If it's routing, it's doing a routing protocol.
10 yen.
I have some ideas for how we could help decide, but we do need to get a decision done based upon preferably real, actual routing requirements, and I haven't seen those written down.
Okay, so.
Let's get you about the exact same point.
Okay, let me remind you of the process that I said we were going to follow at the beginning of this. Okay, if you disagree that if you say that this is the wrong process, then we could have that conversation, although it'll take even more of our remaining 28 minutes. The process that I suggested was that we come up with a list of bullet items that differentiate between Babel and ISIS, and that we explore those issues, and only those issues, because we don't have time to talk about every single issue that we could possibly talk about. I guess let me get a hum from the working group. Does the working group in general believe that that process is a valid process to follow, that we should follow? Or if you believe that we should follow that process, then please hum. The process is we came up with a list of bullet items, and you can see my rough notes for those bullet items on the screen. Or maybe you can't. I don't know. Is it too small? It's too small. Here, I'll. Huh? No, that won't work. Is that any more readable? Yeah, so does the working group agree, first of all, that a list of this type, which may include more items or fewer items, is the thing that we should try to reach consensus on and discuss? If you think that that's a good way to approach this, then please hum. Okay, I didn't hear a whole lot of hums. If you think that's not the right way to approach this, then please hum. Okay. So I heard a couple of people hum, and Marcus was one. So Marcus, can you tell me why you hummed?
I don't think we should set a routing protocol, but that's my personal problem, and I'm willing to deal with it if we actually come out of here today with a routing protocol.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my point.
Fair enough. All right. So what I'm getting is that basically nobody in this room agrees that we should discuss these points, and that there are some people in this room who think we just shouldn't have a routing protocol at all. Okay, well, no. So I'm trying to come up with a way to get us through this decision. And if this is the wrong way, that's fine. I mean, I'm an idiot, right? I don't know any better than anybody else in this room how to get through this decision. This is just some idea that I came up with for how to do it. But a giant line of people at the microphone, all of whom want to say something that's not actually necessarily going to get us towards, maybe it will, I don't know, I hope so, but I haven't heard a lot of convergence on what's been said at the microphone here or at previous IETFs. I think if we don't try to constrain what we're trying to do at the microphone line before we start having people talk at the microphone line, we're going to get to the end of this meeting with no decision.
If you keep letting people yell in the room and then come to the front of the microphone line, like me, we're never going to get to have any discussion at all. So
Okay.
why don't you make people stand in line to talk? Some
All right.
people are doing that.
All right, so does anybody have an alternative proposal to make?
So I'm just for adding stuff here. Lorenzo placed a point, which is time. I think if you want something, you probably want to say by when. And the other thing is the one that Alia said is, okay, you want a routing protocol, what are your requirements? And when you make those differences between routing protocol A and routing protocol B, then you ended up like saying, oh, this should be requirements, and they are not served the same way by those two routing protocols. And now you've got that. Probably what you want to do is say, oh, Mr. Routing Area, what do you have which fits these requirements with this time frame? Mm-hmm. And just back to Babel, but taking something small and allowing to go on a bigger network is probably much easier than taking something which works for big stuff and shrinking it. But the routing area as a routing area working group role, we can still do the work that you want if you just tell them what you want, right? Turning REPL into Babel is basically using any router in the network as a route for REPL, and there you are, you have the same behavior exactly. But the way to get there and the time it will take you to get there is not the same as starting from Babel. Structurally, they're the same protocol.
My name is Peter Hofberg, and Ted cut me off when I'm saying garbage. More than half of the elements that forms the current internet runs ISIS. There are 5 implementations done by 5 different vendors, none of them on that list. It appears to be working. Being around for a little bit of time in this area, I learned that every time we come up with a new routing protocol, and I've been living for 3 of them, we had logical error and then we have implementation errors, and we have them in all of them. And it took at least 5 years to get all of them stable, and we have had major outages in every part of the internet caused by this. It sounds like we have, with ISIS, we have a working platform. We know it works as a routing protocol. We know how it works. There's a lot of expertise. There are missing pieces that, to me, sounds like adaptation layer to specific transport things. And some features missing. Features like extra TLVs are dirt simple to add, as they don't really require any change to the protocol. You just add them. We have people who wanted to do a completely new thing, but it also includes the adaptation layer. So it seems that we can actually improve the risk of actually having a successful thing that actually works. Because what scares me is there are people here in this room that have 100 million customers. There are people in this room that have 20 million customers. How on earth do I debug and fix those boxes if we find out we made a mistake on the logic, not just a single bug? So if you guys want the routing protocol that works, we have free in the IETF. Just pick one. Now, special personal comment. If I get a call from grandma who has a network, and you are running ISIS, so I am in favor of ISIS. If I get hold of one device in her network, and I can dump the LSP database, I can know what wires she has. I can know what wires are simplex. I can know what addresses were assigned by other protocols. I have a fair chance to have grandma debug all those other protocols that we're having with these other configurations. I get some tool set. And most of the customers are going to be grandmas. They're not going to be anybody in this room. I'm done.
Jim Geddes, Google. Fundamentally, I believe that one cannot ignore Wi-Fi, that Wi-Fi is not equal to Ethernet, and nothing I have seen about ISIS has shown it will work in that environment. Whereas the alternative works today on 802.11 networks, and regularly sees competition in battle mesh where they actually test these protocols. So unless and until I see similar kinds of behavior of running code of ISIS being tested in the kinds of ways I know that Babel and OLS are and Batman get tested, I have no confidence whatsoever in ISIS. And the proof is in the ISIS camp in my book to show that they have something that can work. People have talked today about the hidden node problem and so on, and maybe it won't work. I don't know. I'm not a routing person, but there's no demonstration of ISIS actually working in these kind of networks, at least the networks I believe in, which include wireless links.
Thank you, Jim. Wes George. I'll make 2 points. One about the trade-off between Babel and ISIS. I think part of the thing that we're getting wrapped around the axle on is the status of the documents and things like that. The simple solution here is to make sure that at this meeting we agree that whether we choose Babel or not, it needs to move through the machinery to start this process. Because the longer we wait, the longer we argue about whether or not an experimental draft is acceptable, which the routing idea said it's not, the longer we're comparing apples and oranges. And so I think one of the things that would give us a benefit here is, maybe there isn't much change needed in the fundamental protocol specification, but a lot of the assertions about where this is already running and how it's already working in production environments, that's part of an implementation report that would go into a full-scale routing protocol spec. And the act of doing that and getting the consensus review of it, it gives us something so that we can sort of compare it on level footing and have a better sense for what this actually looks like. Right now what we're doing is debating a lot of assertions that, I can waive my assertion against your assertion and we'll see who has the better argument or whatever. And I don't think that's going to be productive. So that might be one way to sort of short circuit this is let's get them both documented to the same level. And similarly, people have raised concerns about the fact that ISIS has a lot of fairly difficult specs. We've got a problem overall in IETF about the fact that you have a document that's been updated by 15 documents, all of which have been updated. How do you find the union of the implementation spec if you want to implement it from scratch? But yeah, so we have this problem in multiple places. If that's part of the issue around trying to really compare ISIS and Babel, then that's the way to fix it, and that's really what we should be pushing for. The other comment I'll make that I think is kind of related to this trade-off is that we have already demonstrated in multiple instances how bad we are at keeping home devices updated. We can't even get security updates consistently into these devices. They're using years-old versions of kernels and other things. Jim can give a litany of all the problems here. We've talked about it in lots of different ways, but I think we rush to make a decision here at our own peril because we're going to be stuck with it.
Well, we certainly haven't rushed.
Now stop, let me finish. If we get to something that is implemented, we are going to be stuck with it for some period of time unless we solve that fundamental problem too. And so,
which we have to solve.
Right, we don't know how to solve it.
No, which we have to solve.
Yes, but taking a little time up front to make sure that we've really vetted this and made sure that it is definitely what we want and that we're not going to run into as many of the potential logic problems from a weak implementation or one that didn't get enough peer review or didn't get enough consensus review, that is going to be a major risk that we've got to consider.
Can I just ask Aaliyah to comment on whether we could do that process? In other words, if we could just start to standardize Babel regardless of how this conversation comes out?
I would be happy to talk about having a working group for Babel. I think it's useful in different environments. What I've heard is that it's useful in different environments, and if the proponents want to, I would be willing to entertain that. I would have to think about whether we would need to have some BOF or public comment, a little bit of commenting for the justifications for it. If it's not selected by HomeNet, it's not as clearly a slam dunk, but nobody has talked to me about wanting to standardize Babel.
Okay.
David Lampotter. I would like to address both Jim's comments and the first 2 points on your slides, which, by the way, turned blue. Sorry. I think I think I'm about to suggest the cop-out solution, which is divide and conquer. I think we should take mesh networks out of the routing protocol discussion and have them be something that needs to be supported, that we need to keep on screen, that we need maybe to stick with Babel for, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be the same protocol. So the reason I'm saying this is that I'm actually part of a host team for a battle mesh, so we were involved in that. And we have seen from mesh routing protocols in general that they work on wired networks, but they are not really doing the best thing there in depending on which protocol you're looking at. And I think this is trying to come up with a universal solution here. And this also extends into all the discussion we're having about Wi-Fi, because the hidden node problem is not something that exists for a normal AP. You only have hidden node when you do an ad hoc network. You can't even, this is a situation that doesn't happen in a normal AP. The AP is either going to reach you or it doesn't reach you, and if it doesn't reach you, it's going to dissociate you. We don't have numbers on how well ISIS does on AP networks. I'm sorry for not looking at that. But it's a completely different problem than trying to support a mesh network. So
yeah, I mean, I think I put that down there because I was not entirely sure, but I had a pretty strong feeling that was out of scope. So it sounds like you're saying it's out of scope, which is perfectly fine.
Not necessarily. I think we should take it out of the routing protocol question. So I'm kind of envisioning a dual environment of both ISIS and Babel here, which for some people is the worst case solution, I guess. But then again, you wouldn't need to implement both unless you're looking at the device that has both wired interfaces and mesh interfaces. So for the default home router that only has an AP interface, you would only need one of the routing protocols.
Well, wait a minute. So this goes on to point 2, which is the optimization for variability of links. It's not just mesh networks that have variability of links. It's any network that is using a wireless network for transit. So we can't exclude that case.
Well, yeah, but it's
this is part of the home net. This is what I mean. Correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't read the document in a while. But my understanding is we do have consensus on the point that we want to be able to use wireless networks for transit.
Yeah.
Right?
I do think that that question is less complex, though.
I'm sorry?
I do think that the question is less complex if we're looking at something that doesn't have a hidden node problem, doesn't have this interactivity problem.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, the thing would be not to rule them out of scope in the home. The thing would be to make them a stub network with respect to the routing protocol we're talking about right now. And then if they route internally, whether it's Babel or Ripple or something else, would be an issue of the people who make those nodes. And like Zigbee nodes use Ripple to route internally, and they would keep on doing that, presumably. But that isn't really like running 2 routing protocols. It's like there's a stub network, and it does its own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
clear from your document, Margaret, that there are swings and roundabouts with both protocols. There are things in favour of one that aren't. They both have advantages, both have disadvantages. The variability link issue, clearly Babel has an edge. So a question for Leah and the ISIS folks would be, what would it take to have ISIS fix that? And that may be a simpler option than trying to get Babel through into a full PS state.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my comment is about, really, is this last, the third point, which is that, ISIS is in a certain state, right? And it's a standard, and it's widely implemented, and it has a couple of drafts that we know we'd have to get into the standards process in order to reference them from HOMENET, but they are already drafts, and there's already a working group talking about them. We might need a third one for this variable links stuff. There's some proof on how to do that already in Babel, but some of that may not apply directly to ISIS. There might be some other work that needs to be done. But I consider that, I can wrap my mind around how much work that is and how it could happen in a time frame that's workable for HOMENET. We could reference the drafts until they become, RFCs and whatnot. I can't wrap my mind around how the Babel thing happens in time for HOMENET, because we're not just talking about taking the existing document and shoving it into a working group and rubber stamping it, okay? The routing area requires 2 independent interoperable implementations, for instance, to make a routing protocol standards track, and there's only one implementation of Babel. Now, as soon as you try to implement it again, I have been the second implementation of a few different protocols now, you find out all sorts of problems, okay? And this is not like a trivial thing. This is going to take, there's going to be interop events, there's going to be months, maybe a year or more of trying to get two interoperable implementations that really work together as well as you would like, and where all that variable link stuff works the same way, and blah, 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 blah. So I can't exactly wrap my mind around how much work it would take to get Babel to the point where we could reference it and use it, which makes me think, why not use the one that actually is there in that sense?
Clarifying, sorry, go ahead. Okay, so I just suggested that the variable link support in Babel is a differentiator, and to my mind it's actually the most significant differentiator. Is there anybody who significantly disagrees with that point of view, that that is actually the key differentiator that Babel has that ISS does not have in our context?
I think it's a key technical differentiator, but I think the amount of work to get it in ISIS is probably a lot lower than the other key differentiator, which is that ISIS is a standards track protocol and Babel is not.
There's another point which actually is pretty key to what you just said, which is that if we thought that ISIS was the right way to go, if we made that decision today, then we could go with ISIS that doesn't have this functionality today, and we could add this functionality to ISIS later. And so the fact that it would take a certain amount of time actually is not even an issue, because it's just a feature we're adding now.
Right. I mean, that's exactly what I meant when I said we could drafts for this stuff, reference the drafts, and they could go to RFC in parallel with us, because there's already a base protocol RFC and there's already a working group. If we're going to start with a BOF and we have only one implementation and we have an experimental document that is not ready for publication as an IETF routing protocol, the few things we need to get in there that aren't there, and there are a few, have to, like, they're in queue behind the BOF. I mean, you know?
Okay, so going back to the question I just...
Even if there's not a BOF, they're in the queue behind chartering a working group and actually getting the spec ready to publish.
Yeah, there's a lot of time involved in doing that.
Okay.
We have 8 minutes.
Okay, keep it brief, please.
Transitivity, need, not need. I agree, not need.
We already decided.
Optimization for variability of links. It may be a key criterion in favor of Babel, but I don't think it is a criterion that should be considered for a routing protocol. This is a link layer issue.
So I don't think we actually need to go down that path, because we already just. I think what Margaret said actually pretty much
Babel versus
deals with
ISIS. Maybe we need a TLV to make Babel routers talk to ISIS routers, as we have OSPF and BGP. And the danger of HNCP doing routing, I don't think so.
HNCP is not doing routing. We don't need to talk about that.
Okay, so there is no danger in that already, because it does prefix delegation, prefix allocation, so yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Aaliyah Atlas. 3 things. First, I want to emphasize what Margaret said about interoperable implementations, and getting those right takes time. And this isn't because of process. This is because we need to have a technology that's going to work with multiple implementations. Okay? This is not process. I don't care about, we can make process go fast. We can't make the technology be properly specified without getting good, multiple, interoperable implementations. Second point, how do we actually make a decision? Frankly, at this point, my recommendation is I think that we need to get a design team of people who are not biased together, including folks from routing, and do what are a rapid one, well before next IETF, that will look through understand the problem, ask some questions to understand what the actual routing requirements are, and come back and say, this is what you said, these were the requirements, therefore we've made that decision. Does anyone have substantial technical reasons why that is not acceptable? And deal with it from there. There are definitely enhancements that will be necessary to ISIS if that's what's chosen. I think it probably makes sense to be over IP, maybe the variability of links. There's other aspects. Yes, ISIS and OSPF This isn't like, oh yeah, of course they're the core, but we don't really trust them. I'm sorry, the internet is running on these protocols and has been for the last 20 plus years. We have a lot of faith in the stability of these protocols. That doesn't mean that new stuff isn't good to look at. This doesn't mean that we couldn't standardize Babel as well if there is a demand for that in a different space. But to treat those as untrusted protocols that we just don't know very much about is a fascinating diversion.
Okay, some of this, Michael Abramson. So I don't think we're going to reach consensus today because we have so different requirements. Jim he wants a mesh network. I'm doing a wired network. And when I decide today, there is no obvious choice. And we're not going to reach consensus here. So let's.
Thank you for that, but I'm not sure I agree with you. And I don't think that we need to debate it. I think we should just try to reach consensus and see if we do.
No, because yeah.
Sit down.
Hey there. So John Brazelli from Comcast. So a couple of quick points. So we have a business case that we were hoping that HomeNet. You and I have talked about this over the years, Ted. That we were hoping HomeNet would have helped solve before, right? Yep. We've had to move on and do some things, and now we're coming up on another phase of things where I'd really like to be able to work and interoperate with what James builds at Nest, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what's going to end up happening, at least from our perspective, is and for the record, we're not opposed to the whole notion of ISIS. I think kind of an incremental approach to kind of that journey really is what makes a lot of sense. We've built a very large V6 deployment on that very principle alone, okay? And it's been very successful. So I think what we're going to do, right, is we're going to take a look at HNCP the way it exists today, this fallback, and we're going to move forward with it, right? We're going to take a look at it, and then we'll let you know how it goes, right? And then we're happy to participate with you guys, continue to work with HomeNet to see how the ISS discussions go, or the IGP or whatever. But we just can't wait anymore. I mean, I don't want to accept failure, right? And I'm not saying that I am. But what I'm saying is we got to do something. We got to move the ball.
Okay.
Right?
So we have 3 minutes left.
I'm done.
Okay. Thanks. Before we continue with the mic line, we have 3 minutes left. It's hard for me to believe that somebody's going to say something that's going to change the outcome. Maybe Chops will. But basically, I think Aaliyah and Margaret have both talked about ways forward here. I mean, if I were to ask the working group right now, does somebody? No, I don't know. I can't even ask the working group this. Yeah, I mean, so yeah. Do we actually not have consensus at this point that ISIS would be a hell of a lot easier way to get to the end goal, which is having a working HomeNet router? So is there anybody in this room who would disagree with the statement that if we chose ISIS right now, we'd get our HomeNet router sooner? Okay. So we've got. Wow. Okay, we've got a lot of disagreement. Sorry? Okay, yeah, I used a double negative. Okay, so let me rephrase the question. Does anybody think that we should not go with ISIS? I know, yeah, that's right. Very different. Okay, so we got a few people to say that. Okay. There's a guy at the mic that says no, so why don't you say why you said no?
Well, so
name?
I'm Chris Grundeman with only my cowboy hat on.
Oh, hi.
And at risk of having shoes thrown at me from several, because this is an argument from several years ago, the reason I'm opposed to ISIS is because I don't know that there's a need for a routing protocol in the home. I think you have two cases.
Okay, but that's out of scope for this discussion. That's out of scope for this discussion.
All right, then the war is lost and you're fighting battles. For
yeah, sorry.
My really quick one was I'm not totally familiar with DNCP, but one advantage also with going with ISIS, right, is it's possible it could be used as a flooding algorithm, right? So you kill two birds with one stone.
That we already kind of decided we weren't going to do that though, so because it was just too painful to yeah. So.
All right, Tony P. Erickson.
So a little bit of old-timer input. Peter deployed 5 protocols. I think I wrote way more than 5 and deployed them. 20 plus years. I mean, this is a small thing compared to what was going on during OSPF ISIS. You may have different requirements, and you may justify a new routing protocol. Okay. My input would be the routing area has a set of processes because we have a lot of scar tissue, and we melted protocols lots of time. Every routing protocol starts small, is easy, seems to work, and then all the hell breaks loose. Okay. So follow the process. I personally have absolutely nothing against ISIS and Babel slaughtering it out in the routing area. And yes, it will take a year or 2 or 5. From experience, you can get it done faster.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
So it's 11:31. We're actually over our time slot. We have not come to any kind of decision here. I think that we have 2 choices here.
Would it be valuable, just to ask the 2 choices and see
Right.
where we are?
Yeah, I think we have 2 choices here. One choice is that we could decide to just, be expedient and go with ISIS. Another choice is that we could do the what Aliyah proposed, which I think was a very generous proposal on her part, which is to have a design team actually hammer out the requirements and get this done fast. I think I saw some objection to the ISIS proposal. Does anybody want to hum and let's just do a quick hum. Hum if you object to just adopting ISIS right now.
Clarification, given the existence of implementation.
I didn't mention implementations.
How can you not mention implementation?
I just didn't utter the words. So next question. Yeah. So next. Yes. Next question. Does anybody?
Runs on OpenWRT on standard boards that are used to build the hardware that you have.
So come on, we really don't have time to do this. Could I have a hum in favor of adopting ISIS right now? Okay, so I'd say that it was about 50-50, classic. All right, anybody against the design team proposal that Aliyah raised, please hum. Anybody in favor of the design team proposal that Aliyah raised, please hum. Okay, that's what we're going to do.
Thank you all for your time. If you haven't filled in the blue sheets, please come to the front.
It's going to be there, and it's like it's efficient. Well, I think actually, but there's also
So I mean,